Somebody said there weren't going to be many people here today because everybody was sick, but you're pretty full out there. It's good to see you all. One of the first things that I learned in my seminary New Testament class was that the stories of Jesus' birth in Matthew and Luke were myths. I was both disappointed and intrigued. If they aren't true, then what are they doing there, was my first thought. Thanks to patient professors, a whole lot of biblical study and improving my Greek, and some chats with God, I came to see the richness and the meaning of these introductory chapters, how a well-crafted story can contain both serious theology and holy spiritual guidance for our lives. Now, if you believe this is an historical account, I don't want to take that away from you. Just listen and see what you think of an alternative approach. Why did Matthew write about Jesus' birth at all, is my first question. Well, in the ancient world, every important person, every famous person, had a birth story. Now, Mary didn't put together a lovely baby book like my mom did for me with pictures and all the firsts. So he wrote a reliable story, a relatable story, infused with theological principles meant to teach his second-century Christian community. I think that the birth stories operate like an introduction of what he will expand on in his next 26 chapters. He assures them that Jesus is God, Emmanuel, that Jesus has the same radiance and glory and holiness that they know in God, in Yahweh. And he clarifies the matter of the Jewish-Gentile tension over who can be included in God's grace. Everybody belongs, no exceptions. And because this is a time of persecution, Matthew trains his readers how to recognize danger and how to deal with it. And finally, how to encourage them on their spiritual path. Before I go on, is this microphone not on? No, it's on. It's on? Okay. Every once in a while, it sounds like it goes in and out, and I don't want to confuse. Okay, it's okay? Okay. So Matthew's birth story employs what I'll call three main characters. If I had an hour, I might give you 6. 3 main characters. There are the Magi, King Herod, and we'll call the star a character. Who did I miss? Jesus. I didn't say Jesus. Jesus is always in the answer, right? Jesus is always in the answer. He's the reason for the story in this case. But it's not all about him. For a moment, he's simply lying there, doing baby things, the object of attention. So let's turn to the Magi first. They offer a certain bit of exoticism, a little mystery, don't they? And they have the best costumes in the Christmas pageant. They are non-Jews, they're Gentiles, probably Zoroastrians, coming out of the region we know now as Iran. Something maybe like a sorcerer or a magician. Not a popular fellow in the Jewish world. In fact, a rabbi not long before Jesus' birth wrote that anybody who took advice from a magi is worthy of death. Matthew says that these magi, star-gazing astrologers, notice a new star, and their calculations tell them that it signifies the birth of a new king in Judah. Since in the ancient world, kings got a star, this would not have been surprising. And since visits to a new king were de rigueur, they prepared for a road trip to Jerusalem. It would be a lengthy journey, at least 1,000 miles, give or take a couple hundred. It would be a multi-month trek. Now, Matthew's story doesn't specify how many there are, only that there were 3 gifts. That sounds like more than one, possibly 3 or more than 3. And they probably would have had camel keepers and personal servants. And since travel alone was dangerous, I'd say that Matthew intends for us to be thinking about these magi as traveling in a caravan. Okay? So why does Matthew use magi in his birth story? Right away, his readers would notice that Jesus' circle includes not just Jews or Gentiles, no, just that his circle does include Jews and foreigners and Gentiles and outsiders of all kinds, like unpopular people from the East. And then Matthew underlines all of this, giving the Magi of all people the distinction of being the first to recognize him as Messiah, as Emmanuel. Perhaps Matthew is preparing them for what will come later, welcoming Samaritan adulterers and prostitutes and tax collectors and Roman soldiers, persons with leprosy. This is just the beginning of the widening circle. And I wonder if he intends these characters to be examples of our spiritual lives. They leave their hometown, their stargazing, and they act. They move. Richard Rohr tells us that a good journey begins with knowing where you are and being willing to go somewhere else. That makes a good journey. The Magi had a good journey. They were not spiritual couch potatoes, and neither should we be. They acted on what they saw and believed, as should we. They have curiosity and courage and persistence, which we need too. Matthew portrays them as discerningly thoughtful and attentive to how God is speaking through holy writings, in a dream, all directing them to resist the power of a tyrant king. And that's our role too. Don't miss the significance then that they traveled in a caravan. There is wisdom in not going it alone, especially when the journey is long and the route unknown and the terrain rugged. What if Matthew's Magi are sort of messaging us also to be courageous, to not give up easily, to be willing to ask for directions, and to be willing to go out of our comfort zone, moving toward the light with support. And sometimes that's a church. So let's turn to the second character, King Herod, Rome's Jewish puppet king, who rules in an unsettled and a violent time. He's a bit insecure and afraid of any competition that might come his way. He worries about maintaining his power and his privilege. Herod would not have been pleased to see these guys from the east come and park their camels out front and ask him, who thinks he is the real king of the Jews, for directions to the new, and he believes, imposter king, that is Jesus. Now, Herod is clever. When his advisors conclude that the birth must have taken place in Bethlehem, that's from the prophet Micah, he feigns piety, and he directs the Magi to go ahead and then come back and report to him what they find so that he too may go and honor this new king's birth. What a crock. He has absolutely no intention of paying a visit to the Holy Family, wherever they are. He's just counting on the Magi to be spies so he can implement a final solution to this threatening competitor king. You know, in the verses just after what Ginny and I read, we find out how far he's really willing to go, killing all of the children of a certain age in the region born about the same time as Jesus. Casting a wild net, get rid of everybody. Maybe I'll get rid of Jesus too. I wonder if Matthew's first readers heard almost a permission-giving sort to resist their oppressive Roman and Jewish leaders. On our journeys, what evils, what temptations, what dangers confront us on our outward journey and on our inward journey? Who is Herod in our world? Do we have skills to discern the voices of goodness and truth from those of alternative truths? See how relevant Matthew's story is for us? Now, there is a whole sermon in there, but it won't be for today. Mystic Anthony de Mello writes that we do not cope with darkness with fists, not by chasing darkness out of the room with a broom. He says, turn on a light. When you turn on the light of awareness, darkness melts. And that brings us to the star. Why does Matthew write a star into Jesus' birth story? Well, we know that light, whether it be stars or sun or moon or halos, is a universal archetypal theme in any religion I know. It is a metaphor for enlightenment. We know from archaeology that early humans worshipped sun gods. I have an Aztec sun god calendar from Mexico. I found it this morning. I thought, this is the day to wear it. Of course they worshipped the sun. When humans were living in caves and candles and then eventually electricity became the norm, back then, after sunset, no one could see anything save on a clear night with a full moon. Fear arose in them, like ghosties and ghoulies and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. Darkness brought hazards that only a light could remove. When the sun god rose in the eastern sky, then the warmth and the safety and the security and the ability to see returned. Light is like that. It illuminates, it guides both the outward and the inward journey. And Matthew knew that his Jewish audience would make the connection with other places that they knew of light. In Psalms, they would have known, "You are a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." In Exodus, they would have known about the luminescence of Moses on Mount Sinai when he's receiving the commandments. they would have remembered the pillar of light guiding their Israelite ancestors out of Egypt's slavery. This starlight guiding the Magi is the same as those other manifestations of God's light. So Matthew is saying, I believe, this light that you know is also the light of Jesus. This light is in the world. Which has me thinking about lighthouses. I first knew the Cape May Point Lighthouse as a small child vacationing in that historical seaside resort nestled in New Jersey's tail, which juts into the Delaware Bay. Just because 3 generations before me had called Cape May home, and because I had read about it and I love it so much, I assumed that I knew Cape May. Has anybody been there? Ah, right. I was surprised then to learn last summer, when my sister and I were on sort of a nostalgic trip back to New Jersey, I was surprised to learn of and then visit the Harriet Tubman Museum. Harriet Tubman in New Jersey. Really? Yes. Documents have recently been uncovered which show that while she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, Harriet worked as a cook in one of the many Cape May resort hotels. Now, Cape May is in what was the Free State of New Jersey, and just a few miles across the sea, the shores of Delaware, which had been a slave state. 18 miles of Delaware Bay separated those folks from slavery and freedom. So the museum docent asked us to imagine a calm night, moonless, and a small boat piloted by sympathetic local fishermen, perhaps abolitionist Quakers, perhaps free black fishermen, who at risk of their own lives ferried previously enslaved persons across those waters. 18 miles between bondage and freedom. And they had a guide. The powerful light of the Cape May Lighthouse. First illuminated in 1857 to warn ships from the shallow shores, that lighthouse standing on the opposite shore was a beacon of hope and light as folks boarded those boats. Well, these days, it might seem that the light is mighty dim. Talk of shining lights and radiant joy may not be your experience. But when the light feels inadequate to offer hope in our darkness, that's when we need one another the most, right? Remember, each of us only needs to light one candle. Well, back to our 3 characters: Starlight, Herod, Magi. Matthew gave his community, and now us, a colorful story whose characters are still speaking to us. Not just in history. They are still speaking to us. From the Magi, Leave your inner and outer comfort zone. There will be temptations, trials, long journeys. There will be seasons of joy and awe and worship. You are included. Stick together. And Herod's role. Know that detractors and tricksters and tyrants are real. So be alert. Make use of what you can. Ancient writings, modern prophets, companions on the way to steer you clear of danger. And from the Starlight, look for it, pay attention to it. It's sometimes dim, it's sometimes blinding. Let it lead you, and be that light for one another. Now, that would be the end of the sermon, except that Jimmy Carter died. So the final words are an homage to Jimmy Carter, President, Sunday school teacher, centenarian, who said, "Justice, truth, service, compassion, and love. You can't see any of those, but they are the building lights of a life. Justice, truth, service, compassion, and love." Jimmy Carter had a good journey, and may it be so for you. Amen.